with demand expected to come back, the question remains, does this mean the economy is back on track?
Companies now, after experimenting with offshore in places like India, Philippines, and Poland, want to bring those jobs back.
We invest in the U.S. We're the biggest exporter in the country. In the cycle we're in right now, we're creating jobs.
From Radio America, it's Neil Asbury's Made in America, the show that explores American industry, large and small, and promotes American-made products everywhere. Put Neil Asbury's Made in America to work for you.
A very big welcome to you today. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. So, Rich, a lot going on this week. We're going to talk about trade. We have Dan Griswold coming back from George Mason University. Great guest, been with us a number of times. America's trade expert. I mean, he has it figured out. A great supporter of American trade and for opening markets around the world and all the jobs they create. I mean, he's got really great ideas. Very much looking forward to see what he has to say, especially with this news clip just came out that President Trump is kind of teasing about a big trade deal with India. So I wonder what that is, because he hasn't talked a lot about it. And I'll tell you, as someone who tries to do business in India, who tries it, it's the most protected market in the world. Maybe Brazil, and India are kind of have to share that designation. But India is a very closed market. I mean, tremendously high duties, all kinds of red tape. And if you compare it to China, I mean, China's in the minor leagues compared to the barriers of doing trade in India. So it'll be interesting to see what the president has to say.
Yep. He's doing some amazing things, and he's coming through with a lot of the promises he made. I think it's one of the things and one of the reasons he connects so well when he gets in front of his rallies, and people just believe in him. He's a popular president. It's hard to beat down. They've tried over and over again since before the inauguration. It's just not working.
And another thing that we'll talk about during the show, I mean, a lot of things to talk about, but it's fascinating that the two top Democrats right now running in this primary are not Democrats. We have an independent and we have a Republican who turned Democrat. Well, he was an independent before he turned Democrat, and a sort of to try to further, I guess, being elected, the third time to the mayor of New York. He had 3 elections to the mayor of New York. Bloomberg getting himself into some hot water, though, with some of the remarks he's had. He's got a huge body of work to go through.
You think? And I think body of work. Okay, good.
Well, literally, I guess that kind of sums it up.
He has a library of outtakes and sound bites.
I mean, they're going to
bite him.
They're just going to get started. They're just getting started.
Oh, I can't wait to hear it.
One of America's great authors, and one of our great investigative reporters is with us now. A great book, really creating quite a stir. He was with us before when he published Clinton Cash and the money trail of the Clintons. Absolutely fascinating. But he's done it again. He's done it again with another New York Times bestseller. It was up until just last week, the number 1 on the New York Times list. I believe it's just fallen to number 3, but still
way at the top.
Very, very great book. 5-time New York Times bestselling author. We're very pleased to have with us right now Peter Schwiezer, who's just published Profiles in Corruption, Abuse of Power by America's Progressive Elite. Very, very timely. Peter, welcome to Made in America.
Hey, great to be back on with you. Thanks for having me.
So tell us, I've read some excerpts, but let's talk a little bit about Bernie, right? I mean, Bernie right now, he's almost lapping Biden in the national polls. It's amazing. I think he's like at 32 and Biden's like at 17. Biden is tanking. Sanders is rising. We don't know what to figure about Bloomberg, but let's leave him out of this for a moment. Where Bernie comes across as this socialist guy, and he's for the masses and for the workers. He's beyond reproach. Corruption. He's the big corruption fighter. How can anyone ever say that he's corrupt? He is the one who fights corruption. So tell us about Bernie first.
Yeah, it's interesting. Bernie kind of positions himself as the John the Baptist of the progressive movement, right? He's the guy, the voice crying in the wilderness, the guy who is eating locusts and honey and is pure. And the reality is that Bernie does have very strong defined views. But when you actually look at the way he has operated as a senator, as a political figure, he has really used his position to benefit his family. When he was elected mayor of Burlington, Vermont, at the age of 39, that was the first real regular job that he had ever in his life. One of the first things he did was put his then-girlfriend, later wife, Jane Sanders, on the payroll. It was for a job that the city council hadn't authorized, and the city council, which was controlled by Democrats, kind of revolted, and Bernie just blew him off. And that was kind of the beginning of this approach. When he ran for Congress and was elected, he realized that there's a lot of money to be made by doing media buys. If you run for political office and you spend $1 million on television and radio ads, the media buyer is entitled to a commission, and that commission could be 10 to 15%. So what did Bernie do is he put his wife in charge of his own campaign's media buying. She didn't have a background in advertising. She didn't have a background in media buying, but it was very lucrative. And we believe that, $150,000 in campaign funds went to the Sanders family as a result of this. So that's kind of been the pattern. He's made a lot of money off of his own book sales. A lot of people don't realize that he's diverted at least $500,000 in his campaign dollars to buy copies of his own book. So it's really a story of a socialist who used to rail against billionaires and millionaires in our politics, but changed that to just billionaires when he became a millionaire himself.
It is really, and I'm in the media business for many, many decades, and the whole concept of someone getting media dollars it's really it's an enormous amount of money. It's not just the 15% that you get for placing it in major media, but it's also the percent you get for creating the collateral material that you use for that. That could be as much as 17%. So it's not a little amount of money. But Peter, it's very interesting that you point out in your book and your discussions that Bernie was asked to endorse a gentleman running for governor, another gentleman running for the lieutenant governor. He would not give those endorsements until what? They had to do something before he would come around and give the endorsement.
That's right. They had to hire his wife Jane's company to do their media buying. And this, again, runs sort of contrary to Bernie's image that, he's principled and his endorsements are based on strong conviction. The first one who was running for governor in 2000 was a longtime political ally, and he was running for governor, and Bernie, months went by, and he was not endorsing this guy, and everybody was kind of surprised, and there was all this chatter in progressive circles. Why is Bernie not endorsing this guy? Well, the guy ends up hiring Jane as his media buyer, and within 2 weeks, Bernie suddenly decides to endorse this candidate for governor. So it's not just he's steering his own campaign cash. There seems to be evidence that he's also leveraging his position to line up business for his wife.
And you know what else I find interesting? And you do such a great job on your research, which is so great because you absolutely footnote everything that's there. So you can connect the dots on your own and come up with the same conclusions. But when you were talking about this is incredible. He goes after the big bad guys, the oligarchs Mike Bloomfield, Bloomberg. He goes after all those guys on Wall Street. Yet what is his portfolio? What does he invest in for his own family?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he goes after big pharma. He goes after Wall Street. He goes after big oil companies. He's going to nationalize some of them. He thinks they're all crooks. They're all corrupt. They're all terrible. But he's got a portfolio. He's worth several $million. He's got a stock portfolio. And if you look at it, he's not investing in so-called socially responsible investment funds. He's not investing in solar companies or in, an organic beef ranch somewhere. He's investing in Fortune 500, S&P 500 stocks, big oil, big pharma, Wall Street firms. And that's where his portfolio has been. And I think that speaks volumes, not just to the hypocrisy issue, but this sort of deep-seated notion that, different rules apply to different people. There was a vote a couple of years ago to apply the Obamacare, health insurance options to U.S. senators. Bernie Sanders voted against that. He said, no, I don't want my health care determined the way it is for other people. I want to stick with the preferred Senate plan. So it's more than hypocrisy. It's this sense that, political figures, public figures are entitled to certain things that ordinary people aren't. It's really quite extraordinary.
Peter, we just got a few seconds before we got to go to a break, and we'll get back into it. But is there any other Bernie stories that you could tell us within the next 30 seconds or so? Then we'll move on.
Well, the diversion of funds to the family includes his wife, Jane. She ran Burlington College as president of the college. It ended up collapsing because of financial distress. But a lot of people don't realize this small college with 200 students, they actually diverted $500,000 of money to Jane's daughter's woodworking school, which was unaccredited. And there seems to be no evidence that the board of directors of the school were involved in making that decision.
Fascinating. We're with Peter Schwiezer, 5-time New York Times bestselling investigative reporter. He's got a book, Profiles in Corruption. You got to go out. You got to get it. Very fascinating. We're going to continue to talk about it still much, much more. Stay with us.
Made in America.
We're back. I'm your host, Neal Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman, and we are together with Peter Schwiezer, investigative reporter and author of Profiles in Corruption, Abuse of Power by America's Political Elite. Very, very fascinating stuff. So, let's Joe Biden, he's really got caught with his hand in the cookie jar. And no matter how much he's tried to spin it, and no matter how much the mainstream media has gone along with it, every time you read about it, they always got this qualifier, unproven allegations. They'll write about it and say, it's unproven allegations. But the American people are not buying into that. Look at what's happening, since this whole impeachment thing with Hunter Biden at the center of it, Joe Biden, right there with him. The American people aren't buying it. They see it for what it is. That is a very clear abuse of power. What have you written about that?
Yes, absolutely. There's a chapter in the book on Joe Biden. We originally broke the Hunter Biden story in my previous book, Secret Empires. We talked about the deal in Ukraine. We talked about the deal in China. And Hunter Biden runs a veritable, United Nations of corruption, not only in Ukraine and China, but in countries like Kazakhstan. And, people say the allegations are unproven. There's no allegation. It's very, very simple. In the case of Ukraine, Joe Biden, Vice President of the United States, is appointed by Barack Obama point person on U.S. policy towards Ukraine in March of 2014. Within 3 weeks, the Ukrainians have hired his son for $1 million, basically no-show job that he had no background and no qualifications in. And the same pattern applies in China. It applies in other countries. So, allegations unproven, it's the oldest story in politics. Follow the money. The Ukrainians are not paying Hunter Biden for his good looks. They're not paying him for his advice, for his expertise. He has none. They're paying him for access, and that is clear. The Biden chapter in the book is about 70 pages long. It includes Hunter Biden, but also 4 other members of the Biden family who have cashed in while Joe was vice president. His brother James, his brother Frank, his sister Valerie, and his daughter Ashley, whose son-in-law cashed in as well.
Well, Peter, I got to tell you something. I read that, and you're right. There's Hunter, James, Frank, Valerie, Ashley. For some reason, the Marx Brothers came to my mind. You have Groucho, Gummo, Zeppo, Chico, and Harpo, and all of them are a story. It doesn't stop. I'm surprised you have 1 chapter. You could have 5 chapters. Can you explain? there's a rhythm to what he does. I got to give him credit because he has a template down. Do this, we get that. Do this, we get that. But then again, he defined quid pro quo. Can you give us one of the colorful ones?
Yeah, there's lots of them. Look at his son-in-law. So there's a business started called Startup Health. And in June of 2011, a couple executives from this new company, they basically have a website. They really have no business. show up at the Oval Office. Joe Biden ushers them in to meet Barack Obama. They take pictures. Those pictures end up on the new company's website. They then are featured at these federal government Obama administration conferences on healthcare and data. This company, Startup Health, is a healthcare investment firm. That's what they're hoping to do. Over the next 5 years, Joe Biden goes to events organized by Startup Health for their partners and their investors, where Joe Biden briefs them behind closed doors on administration policy, future of healthcare, et cetera. Well, one of the three principals in that company, Startup Health, is Joe Biden's son-in-law. You know, that is an extraordinary breach of the sort of things that you're supposed to be doing. I mean, imagine if Donald Trump did that, if one of his kids was starting a new business and they brought him into the Oval Office, they announced it, they took pictures, they slapped that up on the website. The kid's company got featured in all these federal government initiatives. If Donald Trump was showing up and briefing investors of the company behind closed doors, the media would go apoplectic. I would go apoplectic. But that's precisely what Joe Biden did. And, you know, there are similar stories related to other members of the family. I've never seen a single political figure like Joe Biden. I've never seen a single figure with 5 family members. The biggest before this was 3. It involved a Republican senator who had 3 family members who were lobbyists. I've never seen it this extensive and as widespread as it is with the Bidens.
Sort of, well, yeah, it's outrageous.
The American people are zeroing in on that because they're not being fooled. In the time left, what can you tell us about Elizabeth Warren?
Yeah, Elizabeth Warren, it's interesting. So her net worth is around $12 million. You know, she's taught law for years, including at Harvard, and they pay you well, but they don't pay you that well. So the question is, where does Elizabeth Warren's money come from? And what you find is it came from, I would say, one of the dirtiest games in the Washington, D.C. book. People don't realize she was hired in the mid-1990s by Congress, paid by us taxpayers, to help rewrite portions of the U.S. bankruptcy code. And she talks about in legal documents and depositions, you know, how she helped rewrite the code and how that was incorporated into the bankruptcy code. Okay, that's good. That's fine. Here's the problem. She then goes to large corporations like Dow Chemical, Armstrong Worldwide, and says, you know what? Hire me, and I will help you navigate around the laws that I actually wrote. You know, it's the classic play of trading on your government service, trading on the fact that you were paid by taxpayers to do something, and cashing in. So she was paid millions of dollars by Dow Chemical, Armstrong, other, you know, large corporations to help them navigate bankruptcy laws, particularly as it relates to class action torts. And my problem with this is not only that you know, she performed this game, but she sort of positions herself as, I hate corporations, and she says all the time, I fought for the little guy my entire life. No, you didn't. You actually fought for Dow Chemical that was being sued by lots of people over allegations on faulty products, and you cited and got paid by Dow Chemical. That's in part why you're worth $12 million today.
Fascinating. Incredible
story. You have to get this book. You have to get this book.
Profiles in Corruption, Abuse of Power by America's Progressive Elite. So much more revelations by investigative reporter Peter Schwiezer. Hey, Peter, thanks for being on the show. We really enjoyed having you with us.
Thank you. I enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks. Coming up, Rich, we're going to talk about trade with Dan Griswold from the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. Lots to talk about here. Stay with us.
Made in America.
Sharply higher at the open, stocks continued to perform well over the course of the day Tuesday.
And I think that bodes well here over the next couple of years for having bigger demands coming to this country.
Now, more of Neal Asbury's Made in America.
A very big welcome to you today. I'm your host, Neal Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Ruff. And Rich, at the top of the show, I had mentioned about President Trump making a statement that he's working on a very big deal with India, a very big trade deal with India. I mean, India, the second most populous country in the world, very, very important country. They love American products there. The problem is they can't get them. The tariffs, the non-tariff barriers. I mean, India is a really, 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 really tough place to do business.
Big.
Right.
Big.
Like, as an example, we supply a lot of large commercial kitchen appliances, right? So if you're a hotel and you import a product because you're a hotel and you're generating foreign currency because you have tourists who come there and stay, they give you the authority up to a certain number to buy things to help you run your hotel, and you can import them.
And you're a big ticket items.
Right. Because they're capital equipments and
right,
they help
exactly.
to generate
walk-in refrigerators, really big things.
Commercial dishwashing, food
right.
preparation equipment,
exactly.
all this kind of stuff. And so they have a license because they generate foreign currency. But if you're just the run-of-the-mill restaurant and, you got to buy off the Indian market, I mean, you're paying 100% tariffs. And then the alternative is you have to buy local product, which, is really
inferior.
I mean, not even inferior. I mean, dangerous in many cases. Yeah.
Yeah, scary. You may walk into the walk-in refrigerator and not come out.
Not hygiene and, just different things. Just the technology's not there. And, and unfortunately, that's what they got to use because they can't afford anything else because the better products at a lower price are not available to them. So I don't know what President Trump has got up his sleeve, but we're very pleased to have with us America's trade expert, Dan Griswold, from the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. Dan, welcome back to Made in America.
Neal and Rich, I'm delighted to be with you.
So a lot to talk about on trade, and it's just so much to talk about. Maybe we could check in with the UK, maybe check in with China, what's going on with Europe and these tariffs on airplanes and airplane parts. But let's start with India. And, what do you think President Trump may be talking about when he says he has a big deal brewing with India?
I think there might be a little bit of hyperbole mixed in there, but there's certainly lots of things to talk about with India. As you very much pointed out, India has pretty high trade barriers. They're one of the more protectionist countries. That's one reason why they remain relatively poor compared to a lot of other developing countries. I think there's some easy items to tackle right up front. They have some licensing requirements on medical equipment. They've got a really high tariff on motorcycles, which the president seems to really care about. Then, of course, agriculture. So I think they could strike some deals on certain items. But a comprehensive deal with India, I think it would be very difficult to negotiate. It would take a long time, and ultimately I don't think the Indians would go along with it because, unfortunately, under their Prime Minister Modi, who kind of campaigned as an economic reformer, but he hasn't really moved in that direction. If anything, their trade barriers, their tariffs have gone up in India. So they seem to be moving in the wrong direction. I think a comprehensive deal with the United States is pretty much unimaginable in the near future.
So we all know and we agree that trade is good. Trade stimulates, trade provides and inures great benefit for both countries or those involved in the trade deals. So why is it when you listen to the Democrats, and particularly Bernie Sanders, we're going to listen to him, this week on the debate.
Yeah.
Why are they opponents of this? Why do they get so vehemently disagreeing with what's out there?
Yes, unfortunately, the Democratic Party has drifted in a negative direction on trade. 50 years ago, they were the free trade party. They led us out of the protectionist wilderness after the Great Depression. But they're divided. And yes, Bernie Sanders, we could talk all day about where he's wrong on this issue and that, but he's particularly bad on trade. To the president's credit and Ambassador Lighthizer, at least politically, they brought Democrats and Republicans together to pass the USMCA, the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement. Most Democrats were on board with that. Bernie Sanders was opposed to even that. I mean, the administration gave Democrats all they've been asking for on trade agreements. So it just shows you kind of how hard left and anti-trade Bernie Sanders is.
Do you think if he wins a Democratic primary and then goes on to be elected president of the United States, I mean, America's trade relations would go into a deep, deep freeze at that point. Nothing would be going on.
Yeah, I think we'd see a lot of fireworks on trade in America. Guys, I've shared in the past, I'm concerned about some of the things our President Trump has done, but I think on trade, he would take us in very much the wrong direction.
Well, I agree with that. Not only that, when I look at him and I listen to him and his sycophants that are surrounding him, I shudder to think what would happen with negotiations with other countries, because I think Bernie is just completely out of that wheelhouse, to be honest with you. I don't like the guy. I don't like his concepts. Obviously, they're the opposite of everything that we believe in terms of American beliefs and our ideas how to do business and economics. But I got to tell you, I don't think he can't do the job. That's what scares me.
Well, it's not my job to pronounce on kind of somebody's suitability, but on trade issues and actually on immigration, he's not very good either. He's very inward-looking. And very much I'd say anti-business. He's very suspicious of multinational companies, which I think are doing great work in a number of facets. So on trade, the world would be in for a pretty rocky ride with a President Sanders.
Hey, Dan, we're going to take a quick break. We're on with Dan Griswold from the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. Still a lot more to talk about trade. Trade is jobs, good-paying jobs. We need trade. More trade means more jobs. Stay with us.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neal Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman, and we are together with Dan Griswold from the Mercatus Center at George Mason University, America's trade expert. So, Dan, there's still a lot more to talk about, so little time, so much to talk, but the UK, are we going to get a deal done with the UK, and when might that happen, and how comprehensive would that be?
More promising than a trade agreement with India. I think the U.S. government and the conservative government see eye to eye on quite a few issues, and I think there is political commitment, there's business commitment on both sides of the Atlantic to get something done. The British are going to want an agreement. They've officially left the European Union at the end of January, right? That's when Brexit happened, but they're still in the customs union with the European Union. So effectively, they still are operating under the EU's trade policy. Boris Johnson says that is going to end at the end of 2020. They will leave the EU's customs union, and then all their tariffs with the EU and other countries will go to the WTO levels that they've filed under the WTO. So I think Britain's going to be very eager to strike a trade agreement with the United States and their other trading partners, Canada, Australia, Japan, and others. And we have a lot of common ground. They are the world's fifth largest economy. They are the fifth largest market in the world for U.S. exports. They're our number one partner in services trade, particularly financial services. London and New York are the world's leading financial centers. So we have a lot of common ground with Great Britain. Will we get it done this year? Probably not. It takes 18 months or so to negotiate these agreements on the optimistic sides. But I am confident the U.S. and Great Britain will sign a trade agreement in the next year or two, and it will be comprehensive.
How do you see the Huawei situation working out? I know we're having some conflict with them over that, and who gives on that?
Yeah, that's a tough one. It's a national security issue, so I'm not going to get into the details, but I would say Britain's a little bit the outlier on this, isn't it? The United States,
Australia got pretty angry at him the other day.
Yes, and the Brits pay attention to Australia because it's part of the Commonwealth. So I think, and Boris Johnson, in his defense, they haven't allowed them to get into the central part of their 5G network. It's more on the periphery, but that worries people, right? I watched Question Time the other day, and where Boris Johnson was getting a lot of pressure was from his own backbench, other conservative members saying, won't you agree that Huawei is a security concern? So I wouldn't be surprised if the British government backed away from that. I don't think it would be a deal killer with the United States. Even our president is talking about selling certain things to the Chinese. You don't want to shoot yourself in the foot commercially, but you still have to guard your security, and Huawei is a concern.
And what is that concern? I mean, what would they have access to if, say, Britain were to use them?
You know, Neil, that isn't my area of expertise, but the concerns seem to be that, you know, Huawei, while it's sort of kind of a private company, it's also very closely aligned to the government there, and it's concerns that the Chinese government would use the connection with communications networks in the United States and other countries to compromise our security and our secrets and our privacy.
Yeah, and Dan, this might be a totally change of direction, but do you think we'll ever get a deal done with Brazil? I mean, if you talk about India, you got to also talk about Brazil as being one of the most protected markets in the world. And such a rich country. And now they got a new president down there. He's really shaking things up. You know, can we ever get a deal done with Brazil? I'd love to see that happen.
Yeah, well, you know, Neil and Rich, I just before our interview, I was meeting with some people from Brazil from a free market institute in Brazil. And you're right, there are some changes going on there. They have a president that's kind of like our president. You kind of love him or hate him. But they have, I just learned from our visitors, President Bolsonaro has appointed some very free market people in the Treasury, in their other commercial ministries. I think they are serious about reforming their system. Yes, along with India, they're one of the most protectionist countries in the world, at least major developing countries. There's some chemistry between their president there and President Trump. Again, it might be like India. It'll be a kind of partial deal, but I wouldn't be surprised if there was some talk in the next few months, and maybe even some action in coming up with some sort of limited trade agreement between the United States and Brazil. Ultimately, though, it's not these trade agreements. It's Brazil just deciding they are going to unilaterally lower their trade barriers and become more engaged in the global economy. And as you guys know very well, that would very much be in Brazil's interest.
That'd be great. Listen, in the minute or so that we have left, we're seeing right now that the Democratic Party is trying to downplay the economy. I mean, they're attacking it every day right now with sound bites. And yet, if you look at the stats and you see what's really going on, it's the opposite of what they're saying in terms of median household incomes and compensation increase, you know, affordability. Can you just address that for a second? So in about 30 seconds, where we're at?
I've been looking into this. And again, in the State of the Union, the president engaged in a bit of hyperbole, but he was basically right. The U.S. economy is on a roll by virtually everything you look at. Jobs, the stock market, GDP, all that, the economy is doing well. And I think that argues not for getting in there and turning things upside down the way Bernie Sanders would, but just reforming it, helping those workers who've lost their jobs to find better jobs. So yes, the economy is doing well. I would say I think it's doing well despite the president's trade policies, and not because of them, but the president does deserve credit, right? Tax reform, deregulation, all those things I think have helped the U.S. economy continue to chug along at a pretty good pace.
Hey, Dan, we really appreciate you being on the show. Very fascinating. Our time went by very quickly. Dan Griswold from the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. Dan, thanks for coming on.
Thank you very much.
Coming up, Dr. Rothman and I have some final thoughts for the day.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neal Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. So, Rich, you know, we're talking about the economy just a moment with Dan Griswold. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it's as he said, it's really chugging along. And though Dan disagrees. I know he does, because he's fundamentally opposed to any sort of trade restrictions, and so therefore what's going on with China and the threat of tariffs around the world, and not just China, but tariffs in Europe and tariffs in Argentina and other countries that we impose tariffs on. I know that would be fundamentally opposed to Dan's whole career and his thinking, being a free trader. But he does give President Trump credit for the market and how well it's doing. I mean, you can't deny that. I mean, the market is doing well.
Well, you're right, except that the Democrats are now out there every day, multiple sources, all coming from, probably Media Matters laying out the words for them. But they're actually trying to downplay the economy and the roaring economy, as Dan pointed out. And Neil, I have a soundbite I think everyone's going to love. So let's listen to the soundbite. It's from House Majority Whip Clyburn, and he's talking about, the economy. Take a listen.
I'm saying that the African-American unemployment is not the lowest it's ever been, unless you count slavery. We were fully employed during slavery, so it all depends on how you measure this up.
Okay, so
what does that mean?
That's my point. So he's trying to say, wait a minute. Here's the point. The point is racism. The point is that we have to conquer and divide, and we have to go that route, and that's all they got. In other words, short the whole thing, they're bankrupt of ideas. They're trying to say, I guess during slavery, all the black, African Americans were working because they had no choice. They were doing that. But the point of the matter is, he's trying to downplay the reality of everything we've been talking about. The market's doing better, highest employment for blacks, highest employment for Hispanics.
Workforce participation rate is the highest it's been in many, many decades?
Absolutely. One of the highest levels of people believing in this country right now. Gallup just put something out the other day. 61% of the country like where it's going right now. They're very happy with their lifestyle right now. So, but what are they going to do? How do they better that? Well, we got a better idea. We're going to tax the heck out of you. We're going to take money from you. We're going to take your guns from you. We're going to charge you for health care. We're going to destroy your doctor relationship. In other words, they're miserable people. They're taking from you rather than helping and giving to you. So I guess I have to attack the economy, Neil, to make their point and scare everybody to believe that maybe it's not as good as it really is. In the reality, we're doing pretty good.
So what do you think about, Mike Bloomberg in this whole equation? Because, he's going to be there. We're in Florida, and we're just getting inundated like every channel, every day.
Well, this is a big state.
Morning.
They got to win this state.
Afternoon. But,
everyone's got to win this state.
But, he started like weeks and weeks ago. And but I guess it's working, right? Because there's like one state where Bloomberg is actually doing well, and he's leading in the Democrat primary. Is actually Florida. Bernie's beating his butt in Texas. It looks like Bernie's going to take Texas. Bernie's ahead in California, but Bloomberg's ahead in Florida, and he's putting a lot of money there. But does his shtick about being the guy who's really got the jobs and the guy who's really made New York this incredibly successful place, and he's always been about jobs, and is that what he has? Is that all he has?
Here's the problem. And he did it and we saw this over and over again. He took the farm. Now, I lived in farm country, upstate New York, when I was at Syracuse. Great people. Farmers are wonderful people. He said to an audience, listen, I'm going to teach you all how to be a farmer. You dig a hole, you put in a seed, you cover it with dirt, you water it, corn grows out of it. That's what he reduced it to. That's what he took agronomy to. People actually go to major schools to learn agriculture.
His point is that anybody could be a farmer. It's like
right.
You could be nearly brain dead and you can go out there and be a farmer.
But on the other hand, you take the elites on the West Coast and East Coast, particularly in technology on the West Coast. Well, they have more gray matter. So what is he really saying? Let me think we understand this. He's calling all of us idiots. Hillary called us deplorables. No one seems to like us on the Democratic side, and he's continuing that. So what is he really saying to the average American?
Well, he's saying that you're a bunch of knuckleheads.
Exactly. So what's the message that can, of course, I don't think he can deliver. I don't think he's going to connect with the average. No, there's no question. If he's up there, the East Coast, the West Coast, they're going to go for him. They have no choice. They're going to go for him. Maybe in secret, a lot of people on the East Coast and West Coast won't go for him and will go for Trump. That's the factor that's very, very interesting. But overall, the guy doesn't connect. He is the elite oligarch that we're supposed to not like.
Well, that would be fascinating. That Democrats start out with the most diverse, primary candidates, the most diverse, and they end up with an ex-Republican, independent, billionaire
who
Wall
bought
Street
his way
guy
in. He changed the rules.
From New York.
He changed the rules. Oh, my God. Is this like the worst of the worst? Oh, my God. Stay tuned.
Well, Rich, unfortunately, we're out of time. We're going to have to stay tuned. But we're going to be back again next week for another adventure of Made in America, where we never stop fighting for your jobs.